Hi, welcome. In order to be a good chess player, you do have to spend the time to study chess. But what to study? Well, I would suggest to start with the middle game and end game, because those are the two most important parts of the game. However, you do need to have an opening that you're comfortable with, and I suggest the Colle. Why is the Colle good? Because it's an opening where white can choose how to proceed in the game. Well, for an instance, white can choose to attack on the king side, or can open up the center and create an attack there. In this DVD, Susan will show you the Colle system Zukertort variation. She is one of the world's leading authority in this opening. She herself uses this opening for more than 20 years with excellent results. I think you'll be very happy once you learn this opening and use it in the game. Good luck.
Welcome all. On this DVD, we shall learn about the Colle Zukertort variation. In chess, it is white's privilege to start the game. At the same time, black has the choice which opening to choose against e4, the king pawn opening, or d4, the queen pawn opening. Many non-professional players do not have the time to study deep analysis of variations of 15-20 moves in a dozen different openings, and are looking for ways to make it easy, to have one system against the different setups of black. I was once in those shoes myself. In my teenage years, I was looking to play an opening that does not require the memorization of variations, 15, 20 or more moves deep. And I was very happy when I found one. And that's when I discovered the Colle Zukertort variation. This opening gave me a lot of joy, enjoyment, and success. On this DVD, I will share my experiences with you. The world correspondence champion Cecil Purdy once wrote, "Somebody that specializes in the Colle system will have to spend only 1/10 of the time studying chess openings than they would have to otherwise." That is certainly one of the big advantages of the opening. On this DVD, I will share with you my secret methods of studying a new opening. Instead of memorizing long variations, I'm going to show you the opening ideas and plans into the middle game and even sometimes in the end game in the Colle. I will use the same method just like I do in my monthly Chess Life opening secrets column. We'll have 3 parts. First, the so-called appetizer to introduce the opening and a little bit about its history. Then, the main course. Well, you'll see variations and games and the ideas in the opening. And finally, as a dessert, I'll have a conclusion from both white and black's perspective. Let me show you the beginning moves of the Colle. d4, d5, knight f3, e6, e3, knight f6, bishop d3. This is the beginning position of the Colle. Here, black can choose to develop his bishop to e7 or d6, and then later to develop the knight to d7 or c6, and usually they do that with playing c5 and later developing the bishop to b7. The Colle variation is named after the Belgian master Edgar Colle. It has 2 versions. One, to develop the bishop with b3, bishop b2, which will be the subject of our DVD. Also, there is another version, playing with c3 and then later planning knight b2 and e4. that we will not discuss on this DVD. In this very position, black has 5 reasonable choices: bishop e7, bishop d6, knight b to d7, b6, or c5, which is the most common reply in this position. And now white is playing b3. Why? Black is thinking to play c4, chasing the white bishop back. That's why, in this position, white usually would answer either with c3 or b3. b3 stops c4, or c3 would make space for a bishop to retreat to c2. So b3 on move 5. This is the beginning of the Zukertort variation. Who was Zukertort? The Polish Johann Zukertort was one of the top players in the world in his time in the 19th century. Zukertort even got to participate, although lost, in the first official World Championship match in 1886. The first game we are going to see is between the Hungarian Grandmaster Maroczy versus Blake from 1923. Knight c6 and castle. Here black did the trade with c takes d4. I personally don't like that commitment so early. I prefer for black to delay that, develop first castle, and then maybe trade later. White captures back with the pawn, and black developed the bishop to d6, bishop b2, castle. Both sides are developing, making natural moves. Now here white played a3. What's the reason behind this move? To stop a possible knight b4 move that could chase back white's light squared bishop. And black played b6, developing the light squared bishop, knight bd2, and bishop b7. Well, now all the light pieces are developed. The only thing left is to connect the rooks. Queen e2. So now all the pieces are developed from white side. And black played rook c8, putting the rook on the half-open file. Knight e5. White centralizes the knight, which is one of the main ideas in this opening, to then allow f4, rook f3, rook h3, or at times an attack even with the pawn advance g4, g5, as we will see in this and several other games. After knight jumped into e5, black in this game played queen e7, connecting their rooks. And white continued as planned with f4, backing up that knight on e5. And now black is playing not energetically enough. Rook fe8, allowing white to follow up the plan with rook f3, queen f8. Well, this is a type of move that doesn't look good and is not good. It is very rare that a queen on a place like f8 would be in a good position. Usually it's very bad, it's very passive, it has only one square to go to from there. And white continues with rook to h3. Now black already has to be careful. White is threatening with the sacrifice of bishop takes pawn. If the knight takes back, then queen h5, attacking the knight, and the knight cannot move away safely because of checkmate with queen h8. That is why, after the rook came to h3, black played g6 in this position to stop that plan. If instead black would play h6, it would be even scarier because g4 followed by g5 would open up the h file and the rook would be very, very dangerous Imagine if these are disappearing and then the queen appears on the H file. Black is in serious trouble. In the game, black continued with G6, and white, somewhat surprisingly, plays G4. However, there are many examples that white successfully played G4 in such a similar position. The reason why white can afford doing this because the center is quite closed. It's quite unlikely that black would be able to open up the long diagonal where its bishop on b7 could play an attacking role. Imagine if the pawn on d5 is gone, that bishop could be dangerous, especially, let's say, with the help of a queen getting to that diagonal. But that seems quite far-fetched from the position we actually have on the board. Black played queen g7, and white brings the last piece to the game that was sleeping so far, the rook from the corner, rook f1. Black played knight e7, stopping a maybe potential f5 advancement of the f-pawn. And now white has the time to improve the position of the rook from f1. Rook f2, king h8, and rook g2. Now, after a future f5, imagine if pawn takes, there would be a very nice discovered attack from the rook to the queen, and white's king would be quite safe with the rook in front of it. Here black just played rook c7, trying to perhaps defend the f7 pawn after the knight would move away, or also just double up the rooks and maybe look for some counterplay along the c file. White continued with knight d2 to f3, aiming to g5, helping out the other knight and the rooks and the bishop that's already looking at black's king side. Black here played knight e to g8, trying to bring more defense near the king. And now knight g5. Well, black's position looks really cramped at this point. Black played h6, not really attacking the knight because the pawn is pinned. And now white is ready to break through and sacrifice and go for a mating attack. Knight captured on f7, check. Rook captures back. Knight captures pawn on g6, destroying the defense in front of black's king. King h7. Now white repeated a pair of moves, but that has not much importance. And then the knight moved to e5 to check. King h8. And now white is opening the position further in front of black's king by playing g5. Now black's position is lost. Now if black plays knight to e4, trying to close up the diagonal of white's light squared bishop, the answer would be pawn takes on h6 with a discovered attack also from the rook on the queen, and queen f6, followed by queen g4, which is a very nice move with the idea that, for example, if black takes bishop e5, white checkmates in two moves with queen g7, followed by rook captures, pawn captures, checkmate. Going back to the actual game, black did not play knight e4 in this position, but captured the knight first. And now the answer was capturing the knight, creating a discovered attack on black's queen. Here black decided to sacrifice the queen and lost a few moves later. If black was trying to capture back with the queen, white would just capture the bishop, followed by bishop g6, making a skewer on the rooks and having a winning position. The rest of the game would not be interesting from here. White won the real game, and white has a winning position also here. The next game we will see is between Alekhine and Rosselli, and here we learn some more interesting middle game ideas in this opening. We'll pick up from move 11, starting the same position as we saw the previous game between Maruti and Black. So if you look at the board, they had the exact same position in the previous game, and this is where the difference is. Blake played rook c8, although it was not the reason why he lost, although here Black played differently with queen to c7. White again jumps in with the knight, knight to e5. Black played knight e7 and f4. As you can see, White is using the same exact plan like in the previous game. Black played rook a to c8. Now here it's interesting. Black has a tricky plan, and that is to get the knight to e4. That is usually an accomplishment if Black can do without any drawback. Here the idea would be that if White captures, Black captures back, bishop captures, queen captures bishop, and queen captures pawn. Now this trade would help Black tremendously, because now White is stuck with an isolated weak pawn on d4, and on top of it White has a bad bishop because the other pair of bishops got traded off. Black would have a beautiful blockade square for his knight, and Black would have a simply better position, also in control of the c file. But in this position it is White's turn, not Black's, and that is why White made a strange looking move, rook a to c1. But it is quite typical in this opening, so remember this idea. Now, if Black still plays knight e4, the same idea will not work, because the pawn on c2 is protected by the rook. By the way, another interesting question about playing c2, c4. Well, the whole idea of the Colle is to hold on with that move. If White would play it much earlier in the game, those would be one of the typical Queen's Gambit variations. Of course, White can make that move, but usually it's not the idea, only when it's really time to do it, like actually we'll see later in this game. Here, White's plan is still the same, to get the rook out to f3, h3, and threaten with bishop takes h7, knight takes, and queen h5, just like in our previous game. Understanding that, Black already here played g6, but that is a weakening in Black's king's position. And Alekhine immediately played g4, just like in our previous game. Here Black played h5, which I don't like because it weakens even more Black's king side, and White simply played h3. Now, White's plan, I guess, would be similar, playing rook f2, g2, like we saw in the last game. However, Black made another mistake, king g7. And by making this move, the position became ripe to play c4, because the king moved into the diagonal of White's dark squared bishop. We do want to open that diagonal and play c4. Another reason why the time is right to play c4 now is because Black's queen is also in the line of our rook on the c file. So between those two things and a third one, that Black's bishop on d6 may get in trouble, may get entrapped in some variations. Makes it possible and good for White to play c4. If in this position Black captures on c4, White's plan is to capture back with the bishop. Now, White is threatening with some discoveries, such as bishop takes e6. And after the Black queen moves out of that discovery, White would try to create another one by sacrificing a pawn and play d5. And let's say after pawn takes pawn, g5, chasing away the knight from f6. If the knight moves away, then of course knight c6 or such, discovered check would win black's queen. And after pawn takes bishop, pawn takes knight. Of course, it's quite suicidal to capture back with the king because the double check comes with the knight. And after king f5, a cute checkmate with knight h6. In the actual game, black did not capture the pawn on c4 in this position, but played queen d8 right away. And now the answer was c5. Again, white wants to open now that diagonal for their dark squared bishop. If pawn takes on c5, white would first play g5, and after the knight moves away, then pawn takes, opening the diagonal of the bishop, and bishop takes c5 check. White would just sacrifice the rook for the bishop, followed by a discovered check with the knight on c6. Black here instead captured the knight, then Alekhine recaptured with the pawn. The knight had to go, and white simply played b4, creating a protected pass pawn on c5, maintaining the attack on the king's side. White had a clearly superior position and later won the game. The next game is played between then two young players, Barbero versus Liao, in a different move order than we saw so far. d4, knight f6, knight f3, b6, e3, bishop b7, bishop d3, e6, castle, d5, and b3. Well, very often actually it starts out with different move orders, but eventually they reach this very same type of position. Bishop d6, bishop b2, castle. And white played knight e5, centralizing the knight. c5, knight d2, knight c6, a3, rook c8, f4. So we're back to the same positions we've seen before, and now black again traded on d4, pawn captured back, and the knight did come to e7. Right now, if black could make another move, they would jump in to e4. As I mentioned earlier, that something would help black. And that is why white here played queen e2, similarly to the last two games we've seen. Here black played bishop b8. Again, not the right plan. What black should try to do is either to get the knight to e4, if he can, or try to develop counterplay on the c file. Again, white is ready to play g4. Queen c7. Black again is renewing the idea of knight e4. For example, g5 now could be answered with knight e4, because after the trades on e4, the pawn on c2 would be hanging. As we learned from the last game by Alekhine, white now protects the pawn by playing rook c1. Black plays king h8. And again, white is bringing the rook out towards h3. Knight g6 and g5, advancing, chasing the knight away. Knight h5 and rook c to f1, protecting the pawn on f4, because now there is no need any longer to protect the pawn on c2, because the knight is away from the e4 square. Black traded knights, the pawn captured back, queen e7 attacking the pawn, but simply queen e3 protecting, Now black's trouble is the knight on h5 is really misplaced. Rook c e8, rook h3, attacking the knight. The only way to defend it is by the pawn, g6, and now a cute move, rook f6. White more than happily gives up the rook for the knight, because then a very dangerous pawn gets to f6, and then followed by queen h6, white will mate very quickly. Black did not capture, but played rook to c8, and now white got a winning position after rook sacrifice on h5, when actually black resigned, because after pawn takes, rook h6, black has no defense against the attack of threatening rook h7 and then followed by g6, queen h6 moves. What did we learn from all these three games so far? Black traded prematurely on d4 and then did not find a real plan for counterplay against white's dream plan, getting the knight to e5, playing f4, and getting the rook out on f3, h3, and connected with playing g2, g4, and developing a deadly attack against the black king. Our next example is a game between Uwe and Krohn from 1921. In the position you see on the board, black played rook e8 with the idea of playing e5 next. Well, that's wishful thinking, because the white knight jumps there right away. That was the plan anyway. Now, even more so. Black played queen c7, putting more pressure on the knight. And now, as expected, f4, backing the knight up. And now, this is what black had in mind. Pawn took on d4, white took back, and black played knight b4. This is what can happen when white does not play a3 earlier. However, here it's not a real problem. The bishop moves away by attacking the rook. And after the rook moves away, now white can chase the knight right back where it came from. c3, knight returned to c6, and white is ready to roll and play queen f3, this time bringing the queen out to attack. Bishop d7, and now, of course, the bishop belongs back on d3 to help out in the attack. Black played bishop e8 and came queen h3. Now, white's plan could be again play g4 followed by g5, chasing the knight away from f6 to play queen h7 after. Black played g6 before any of that would happen, and came queen h4, attacking the knight. The knight went away. If instead black protects the knight, white could have similar ideas, like in the other game we saw when white was opening the diagonal for the dark squared bishop by playing c4 and then trying to play c5. The knight moved to d7, and nevertheless white was ready to play c4, because the dark squares near the black king are weak. They would not be weak if that bishop would be on g7, but it's not, and it's not getting there easily, because even the rook on e7 in its way to get to f8. Knight f8, knight traded on c6, and now black is in real trouble, because either the bishop will get trapped after, for example, pawn takes c5, the bishop has no safe place to go to, or after queen c6, as the game continued, white plays c5, again attacking the bishop, and even though the bishop does have safe squares to go to, then the rook would fall off, and that is why black resigned after c5. The next game we shall see is all the way back from 1903 between Rubinstein and Salve. In the position you see on the board, black did trade on d4, white took back, and black tried an interesting idea, playing knight h5. Little bit unusual, putting the knight on the edge of the board, but the idea is to play knight f4 and chase that bishop away from there. And this is what white did. White simply played g3, not allowing the knight to come to f4. Black answered with g6, not wanting to just go back to f6, when white played the same usual plan, knight e5, bishop d7, and f4. Nothing changed. Knight g7, and now finally got the time to play a3, preventing any future knight b4 annoyance of the knight towards the bishop. Now we'll see something we haven't seen yet. When black plays f5, kind of holding back white's attack. Of course, the drawback is that now white's knight on e5 cannot be chased away anymore. It can only be traded. White continues normally, improving his position little by little. Queen e2, connecting the two rooks, bishop e8, and knight from d2 to f3. Usually, when the black knight is not anywhere near the e4 square, such as on g7 and not on f6, it is safe to move that knight away towards the attack. Usually, until the black knight stays on f6, the white knight also tries to stay on d2 to control the center e4 square. Black played rook c8, getting the rook to the half-open file, and now white prepares the breakthrough. The breakthrough will come with g4. But before that, let's get the king out of the way. King h1, black played h6, queen e3, preventing any possible counterplay with g5, but black doesn't give up, plays bishop e7, rook g1, g5. It's not a very fortunate idea for black to open the g file, since white's rook is a lot more prepared, being already on the g file. And the answer is g4. Let's go for it. Now, if black captures on g4, white would capture on g5. And if pawn takes knight, pawn takes pawn, and black is in trouble because the knight is pinned. In the actual game, after white playing g4, black actually captures on f4. Naturally, white recaptures, queen takes f4, and attacks the pawn on h6. And black played bishop g5, attacking the queen. Knight captured bishop, and pawn captured knight. Queen moved away to g3. Now white is threatening to capture the pawn and then win the pawn on g5. Black played f4, but that chases the white queen to h3. Now white threatens to checkmate with queen h7. Knight took on e5, so now the black king at least can escape on f7. Queen h7 check, king f7, and pawn takes knight. Now the threat is simple. Bishop to g6, chasing the king away, and then picking the knight up. That is why black protected the knight with rook g8. And now, a cute move that I really like. a4. Just a part of the board where you would not expect it. But it's time to let the dark squared bishop play too. I bet you already see the idea. To appear with the bishop, bishop a3. And then checkmate, or perhaps check first and then give a second check with the bishop on a3. Black played b6 and then followed bishop a3, threatening checkmate with queen or bishop. And the best black could do is give the rook up, but of course that only delays the end, does not change the result. Queen g6 check, king f8, and queen f6 check, forcing the trade of the queens, and on top of it, that we traded queens, we trapped black's knight. Now, not only that black's rook is pinned and lost, so is the knight. It's trapped on g7. That is why black resigned just in a couple of moves. The next game in our typical game section is played between Evans and Gomez. Well, it will be slightly different because the dark squared bishops will be traded off very quickly. Black played in this game queen e7. The idea is the same as after rook e8. White here played knight e5. Black traded on d4. Pawn took back, and black played bishop a3, with the idea to trade off those dark squared bishops because white already kind of weakened the c3 square. I remember when I was growing up and learning this opening back in the early 80s, this used to be considered quite good for black. The theory has somewhat changed since then, as we'll learn about that in a little bit. White traded bishops, and the queen captured back, and white played c3. Black responded with bishop d7, developing, and white plays f4. Like nothing changed. The plan is the same: get the rook out to f3, h3, and try to sacrifice the bishop on h7 and checkmate. Simple, isn't it? Well, black has one or two things to say about it. Although in this game they haven't found quite the right defense. The queen returned to d6, and white was ready to get the queen out for a change. Rook ac8 and queen h3. Now, white is attacking the pawn on h7 with the bishop and the queen. So the only thing that's in the way is black's knight. So if white could, for example, deflect that knight by playing knight g4, and then the knight, let's say, captures, white would checkmate, or other than that, white would be threatening to capture the black knight and checkmate. Another way to try to chase that knight away would be play g4 and then g5. Black responded by playing g6, just like in some of the other previous games we've seen. The drawback of this, of course, is weakening the dark squares in front of the king. White played rook a to c1, protecting the pawn on c3 just in case, even though it wasn't yet under attack. But the black knight on c6 could move away, jump away any time to e7, or if the queen wasn't on d6, maybe capture on e5. Black here played a6, which seems a little slow, and the white queen got to h6, getting close to the king, with the idea rook f3, rook h3, and then again chasing the knight away. Black played knight e7, white played knight df3, getting the knight closer to the black king, and knight f5, hoping to chase that queen out, but no such luck. Bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and knight g5. Well, now black's position is real scary, with 3 of the white pieces right near the king, and the 4th one potentially coming. Bishop e6, defending the f7 pawn another time, and rook f3. Rook f e8, and the position is ripe for a combination. Knight captures h7, knight captures h7, and rook h3. Of course, the knight now cannot move away, because that would allow a checkmate in just one move with queen h8. Black played queen c7, white captured the knight, king f8, and now an important move, rook e1, because the black king is likely to get to e7, and then it's real handy to get that rook on the e-file. Now, if black plays, for example, queen b6, there is a cute trick. White would give a fork, check, knight d7, and if bishop takes, white is ready to checkmate with queen h8. Black played differently, but lost just as quickly. King e7, trying to run away, but now black is in too many pins. Knight took on f7, now there is a threat of discovered check, jumping with the knight. Black was trying to get out of that, but didn't help. Knight g5 came. Black resigned here because after queen captures queen, the rook would capture back, and white would have a sneaky checkmate threat, capturing the bishop and then checkmating with the rook. Well, regardless of these tricks, white was already up 2 pawns, and even if black could delay the very end a little bit, the game is over. The next game is played between Summerscaled and Jimenez. In the position you see on the board, white played knight to e5. And for a change, black captures that knight. Let's see how that develops. Knight takes knight, and pawn took back. Knight moved to d7, and white plays f4. Well, the general ideas are similar. We still have in mind maybe getting the rook out, and maybe with the help of the queen. But there are additional plans with this changed pawn structure. Often, white would want to play c4, so after a trade of these pawns, the knight could get to d6, and either to stay there to paralyze black's position, or if black decides to capture, that would open up, finally, the dark squared bishop of white. Another plan white has in these type of positions is to play e4 with similar ideas to open that diagonal for the dark squared bishop. For example, if black captures, to capture back and again jump to d6. Another plan white has in these type of positions is to play f5. With the same idea, all with the same idea, trying to get this pawn out of the way of the bishop. Black played bishop b7, developing, and white played queen h5. White understands that after, for example, g6, the queen will have to retreat, but white considers that a weakening of black's king side. So white on purpose is willing to lose a tempo to provoke black playing g7 to g6 or h7 to h6. Black did play g6 and the white queen retreated to h3. And here black tried an interesting but not very good idea. He played b5. Black is looking to advance on the queen side and open files for his pieces by playing c4. In the meantime, black is sacrificing a pawn on b5. This is what black had in mind. Queen a5. Now the black queen is attacking two white pieces, the bishop and the knight. White here captured black's knight, and black captured the white knight. Now white's pawn on c2 is under attack. But white has a nice move, attacking black's queen and protecting that pawn at the same time. The queen retreated to b4, h3, and the queen retreated all the way to b6. Now white is a pawn ahead, but there is one difficulty. The bishop on d7 is kind of trapped. Well, not quite trapped, but has difficulty in coming back to play. But white had an ingenious idea here to develop a quick attack on the king side. There is one very important factor here that helps white, and that is that there isn't much coordination between black's king side pieces, where the king is, and the queen side, where the queen and some of the other pieces are. So black has difficulty in swinging over the queen to the defense of the king. And here came the attack. f5. Well, it would be great and simple if white could just push the pawns through next move, playing f6 followed by queen h6 and g7 checkmate. But of course, f5 involves some sacrifices. Definitely at least a pawn sacrifice to start with. Black can capture that pawn, and he did. G took the pawn, and now white is ready for more action, and white sacrificed the rook as well in order to open up more files, diagonals in front of the black king, and to remove some of the defensive pawns from there. Black did capture the rook. If instead black would have played rook a to d8, white's plan is to play rook h5, and after rook takes bishop, the rook takes the pawn, and the checkmate is very near. But in the game, black did capture the rook, and the bishop captured back. Now white threatens with checkmate by taking on h7. And now the only way black can prevent that without giving up the queen is to play h6. Now finally the dream of this variation comes true. The diagonal opens up and this bishop on b2 takes part in the game. After e6, if black captures the pawn, white's plan was to take queen h6 with numerous checkmate threats. But black thought they found a good defense. Bishop g5, hanging onto that pawn on h6, and closing up the g file at the same time. But here white found an ingenious move, playing bishop f6. If black now captures the bishop, queen h6, and black cannot stop the checkmate in 2 moves. In the actual game, black instead captured the pawn, when white recaptured. Now, if black plays king h7, white checkmates with a cute queen f5, when white takes one diagonal with the queen, the second with the bishop, and the third one with the other bishop. That's kind of an unusual type of checkmate. In the game, black answered instead with rook f7, when bishop took bishop, pawn took bishop, and finally the sleeping rook comes into the game, pinning black's rook on f7 and attacking it a second time. And after rook a to f8 protected the rook, white played rook f6, threatening with checkmate with rook g6, and black is lost because, for example, after king g7, the answer would be queen h6, king back, and checkmate. Quite a fun game. The next game is a famous game between grandmasters Yusupov and Spiridonov back from 1983. In the position you see on the screen, white played knight e5, offering the trade of knights, just like in the previous game we saw where black did trade those knights. In this case, black tried knight to b4, chasing white's bishop back. Well, the bishop did retreat, and black developed the bishop. Now, white could chase the knight back by playing a3 or even c3, although I prefer a3 in such situations not to block off this bishop even more. But Yusupov played f4 without rushing playing a3. Here the other black knight also jumped to e4. Well, we haven't seen yet this try on black's end. It's a pretty good one, so you have to watch out for it. Knight captured on e4 and pawn captured back. Now the good news is that the white bishop is very likely to get alive after these pawns disappear. The bad news is that sometimes this pawn can be annoying because it's restricting the movement of the white pieces. White played a3, chasing the knight back. The knight went to d5, attacking the pawn on e3, and queen d2, protecting the pawn and connecting the rooks. Well, the good news is in this position that white can even think of an endgame. After, for example, these pawns disappearing, black would have an unfavorable endgame because they have double pawns on the e-file and white has pawn majority on the queen side. So besides trying to develop an attack like white did in this game, white has nothing to fear even in a positional game. Black answered with rook c8, and now came c4, chasing the centralized knight away. Knight returned to f6, and rook a d1, putting the rook on the file that's about to open. Bishop d6, and finally the time came. D takes c5. Now the only way black can recapture, not to lose the bishop, is with the bishop. And white plays queen c3. Oh yes, this can be quite dangerous when a bishop and a queen lines up like that on a diagonal, right aiming at the g7 square. Look what white has in mind. Perhaps playing knight g4 or knight d7. Of course, the black queen is hanging for now, but after it moves away. Here white has several options. Let's start with knight g4, which looks good because if the black knight captures, we are ready to checkmate on g7. However, black has a defense by retreating the knight to e8 and protecting the g7 square. If white tries knight d7, which besides attacking black's knight also attacks the rook, then on the other hand, black could escape by playing bishop e3 check. And when the queen moves away from attacking the g7 square, then knight takes knight. But white found a better way to continue. He played f5. With this move, white opens the f-file and brings the rook on f1 into life. Pawn took pawn and rook took pawn. And here, black got a little greedy, and that's why lost quicker than he should have. Captured the pawn on a3, and after the trade of bishops, the black queen got away from the defense of the king. Now, white was ready for a sacrifice. Rook captured knight, and after pawn captures rook, knight g4. Now, black's trouble is that he doesn't have the time to bring the queen back to defense, because then knight captures pawn, forcing the king onto the diagonal where white's queen and knight is, allowing a discovery with knight d5, winning black's queen. Black played rook c6, but still knight f6 came, rook captured knight, queen captured rook, queen took the pawn, attacking on e3, and here white even had time to play king f2, simply protecting the pawn on e3 before starting the final attack. Black played queen a4, and now white can win a piece with a cute little intermediate check. Check on g5, chasing the king away from the rook, and now that the rook is on an unprotected square, queen e7, forking black's rook and bishop, and black resigned. The next game is played by the former world champion Vasily Smyslov versus the Italian grandmaster Mariotti back in 1974 in Venice. In the position you see on the board, which is the same as the previous couple of games, black did not capture the knight, black did not move the knight away to b4, but played the standard developing move, bishop to b7. Well, I bet you know our move now. It's f4. And in this example, black traded the knight on e5. White recaptured with the f-pawn for a change. And after knight e4, white captured on e4 with the bishop. The idea is that after pawn takes bishop, white has access to attack black's double pawn. The e4 pawn is hard to defend because after f5, white could do and pass on, capturing the pawn. If here black would play bishop g5, attacking the pawn on e3, white could simply protect that pawn, and then the pawn on e4 is still in trouble. Black, instead of defending, decided to counterattack and played rook to c8. Now, if white captures the pawn on e4, black would capture on d4, and therewith opening the c-file and attacking the pawn on c2. So after white would recapture on d4, the black rook could capture on c2. Now, white played c4, putting that pawn to a safe square, renewing the threat on black's pawn on e4. Black captured on d4, with the idea that if now white captures with the pawn, which is the natural looking recapture, then black would try bishop c5, which is an unusual looking move, putting the bishop under attack, attacking white's pawn on d4 though, with the idea that if pawn captures bishop, queen would capture the knight, attacking white's bishop on b2, and after rook to f2, queen e3, it would be a complicated position, but with reasonable chances for black as well. That is why Smyslov captured with the bishop instead, even though now white is still stuck with their own double pawn. But white is shooting for that e4 pawn to win it, because a double pawn is okay if it's an extra one. Again, black has difficulty to protect that pawn directly, so black is looking for various ways to protect it indirectly. Black played bishop c5. Now, if white simply captures the pawn on e4, black would capture white's bishop on d4 and then win the pawn back. White captured first black's bishop. Now, if black, instead of capturing white's bishop on c5, captures the knight on d2, black's rook on f8 would be under attack. So therefore, black had to recapture with the rook, and after knight captured on e4, black thought that he's home safe because they can capture the pawn on e5, which black did. Knowing how the game ended, black thought it was better instead giving up on that pawn on e5, but instead trading off white's dangerous knight on e4 by bishop takes knight, even though white is better than as well. After rook captured the pawn on e5, white very quickly developed the initiative. Knight f6 check. That's possible thanks to the pin on the g file. King h8, the king got chased to the corner, and now the rook got with a tempo to the open file by attacking black's queen. The queen moved away to e7. Now white has two ways to fork, a good and a bad. White played the correct one by attacking black's queen and bishop. On the other hand, attacking both black rooks would not work well because black has a lucky escape move with rook g5. After rook d7, black moved the queen away to c5. And now things seem okay for black. If the white rook captures the bishop on b7, black would capture white's knight after capturing first the pawn with a check on e3. But here white has a very good move. Simple, quiet, but very powerful. Queen d4. This offering of the trade results in a big advantage for white. This is how the game continued. Bishop captures g2. And now another fine intermediate move. Knight g4, bringing the knight away from danger, attacking black's rook while black's bishop is still under attack. Queen captured d4, pawn recaptures. Now if the bishop takes the rook, the knight will take the black rook, and too many black pawns are hanging besides the bishop on f1. Black continued with rook g5, and now rook f7, capturing the pawn with a tempo, attacking black's rook. Now black cannot trade rooks because of the back rank problem. White checkmates. Black played king g8. Now white already trades rooks and captures the bishop finally. Rook captures knight, and king f3, attacking black's rook, rook h4, and white's pawn ran too fast, c5, rook h3 check, king e4. Here, both white king and rook are far too active and the white pawns are more advanced than black's. Even though right now there is equal material on the board, white is completely winning. The last couple of moves of the game were rook c3, b4, pawn captured back, rook c2, rook captured, rook h2, and king e5, and black resigned because white's c-pawn is unstoppable. The next game is another one by Grandmaster Yusupov, who is one of the strongest players who regularly plays this opening. In this game, his opponent is Sharon. In the starting position that you see on the board, black here played knight b8 to d7. The answer is the usual, bishop b2, and black played b6. Castle, bishop b7, and white was ready for knight e5. In this position, if black trades knights and then jumps into e4, the problem is that white can give a check and black can only answer by moving the king out, which would mean losing the right to castle. That is why black played here a6 to prevent those bishop b5 moves. Also, perhaps to prepare b6, b5. White played knight d2. So far as you see, in practically every game, white does exactly the same 9 moves. Maybe sometimes in slightly different order, but nevertheless the same setup. Now it would not be recommendable for black to play knight e4 because white would capture the knight, and after pawn captures back, knight would capture the knight, queen captures back, and knight c4 would come, attacking the pawn on b6. That's no longer protected by the pawn on h7, which normally is. Now, black cannot just push the pawn because a fork would come with knight b6. So therefore, black would need to protect the pawn when white would capture dc5. Now black has to face another problem, that he cannot recapture with the bishop like he'd like to, because then the pawn on g7 is under attack. Neither can black recapture with the queen, because then bishop d4 would come, winning the pawn on b6. That leaves black with capturing with the pawn on c5, and that's not a pretty sight. Black is full of isolated pawns and a double pawn on e4. White is clearly better here. Black here, instead of normal developing of the bishop and then castling, like we saw in other games, played b5. Usually, those type of things, breaking the rules early in the opening, neglecting development, don't end well. Here, white right away took the opportunity to open the diagonal for the dark squared bishop. First, white traded knights. After the queen recaptured, white also took on c5. Now the way is clear for the bishop on b2. If instead black captured back on d7 with the knight, white's plan was to play c4 and open the position quickly, trade a whole bunch of pawns in the center, because black has neglected development. After the queen recapture, d took on c5 and the bishop took back on c5. Now white has to play energetically before black gets to complete development. Queen f3, putting pressure on the knight on f6. Here, if black would like to take advantage of a discovery by playing d4, attacking white's queen, white gets a better position after playing knight e4, threatening black's bishop, as well as to capture on f6. Black retreated the bishop to protect the knight on f6. Here, white has a choice to try to put pressure on the h7 pawn after black castles, or to move to g3, which white did, attacking the pawn on g7 right away. Black castled, and white played knight f3, improving the position of the knight, centralizing it, trying to jump to e5 or maybe sometimes g5 or d4. And here black had to start getting careful. As you see, the two white bishops are beautifully pasting towards black king, so is the white queen, and the knight is getting closer too. Here, perhaps h6 was a better move than what black did, rook ac8, which is a natural move, putting the rook in an open file. White was ready and played knight g5, putting pressure on the pawn on h7. White is directly threatening to capture the knight on f6, and then to capture the pawn on h7. Now, the natural-looking h6, which seems to chase the knight away, doesn't work, because the knight goes to an unexpected square to h7, attacking black's rook and knight as well. And black could not capture white's knight, because that would open up the long dark squared diagonal, allowing checkmate with queen g7. Seeing that, black rather played g6, but that again doesn't look very good, because now the bishop on b2 is even more powerful, because even that pawn is not in its way. White played queen h4. Well, the threat is clear, bishop takes knight, and then checkmate with queen h7. Black had no choice but play h5, therewith further weakening the king side. Now, the black knight is free to move. For example, knight e4 could be an idea for black. Could black play another move? That is why white played rook a to d1, prevent that opportunity for black, and also to centralize the white rook. Here black made a decisive mistake. Instead, they should have moved the queen out of the file of the rook before the file opens, and it's too late. Black thought they can play knight h7 and use the pin on the knight on g5. If the knight moves, the queen would be under attack. But white had planned something very nice. Can you see what's the move here for white? I bet you can find it. Queen h5, a very pretty sacrifice. If pawn captures queen, we get a pretty mate with bishop takes knight. Of course, black saw that and played rather bishop takes knight. But here comes a second combination. Bishop captures pawn, threatening again checkmate by capturing the knight. If pawn captures bishop, queen captures pawn, and checkmate comes on the following move. Black had no other choice but playing f6. Now black's queen protects the knight on h7. But now the black bishop gets trapped after playing f4. After winning back the sacrificed piece, white will maintain the attack and be a pawn ahead. Black played queen g7, pawn captured bishop, knight captured pawn, h4, chasing the knight away, knight e4, bishop captures e4, pawn captures bishop, and the final move is rook f4, threatening with rook g4, and black cannot avoid further losses. Therefore, black resigned. This was the game by Grandmaster Yusupov that I saw back in 1983 that motivated me to start learning more about this variation. I was quite impressed how quickly, beautifully, easily White won this game, thanks to the power of those two beautiful bishops pasting over Black's king side. I hope you enjoyed the game just as much as I did. The next game is played between masters Filatov and Meyer. Black again developed the knight to d7 in this game, bishop b2, and the bishop to e7. Knight bd2, b6, castle, and bishop b7. Queen e2, castle, and knight e5. Again, the same plan. Queen c7, and here White played a3. Honestly speaking, I don't see it very necessary in this case, considering that the black knight is not on c6, like it was in some other cases when the knight was threatening to go to b4. But that's what White played, and black played a6. And now came f4, so we're back to the normal plan. b5. And now we shall see something new that we haven't yet seen, although it's quite common in this variation. So remember this idea very well. White can capture on d7 here. Now, if black recaptures with the queen, White would capture on c5, bishop captures, and that would allow bishop captures knight, pawn captures, and bishop takes h7. Black cannot capture here, well, because check, followed by a second check, and then bringing the rook up, followed by checkmate with rook h3. This is a very typical combination in this variation. That is why black captured rather with the knight on d7. And white captured on c5. Just like in the second Yusupov game we saw, now white opened up the second bishop's diagonal as well on b2. Here, let me first show you what happened in the actual game, where black recaptured with the knight, which is the most natural looking move, attacking white's light squared bishop on d3. Now, white is ready for a double bishop sacrifice, just like in the famous Lasker combination. Bishop captures h7, king takes bishop, queen h5 check, king g8, and bishop takes g7. What is white doing? White is destroying the pawns in front of the black king, opening up the files to attack and checkmate the king. Black captured the bishop, and after queen g4, black resigned, because if the king moves to the h file, the rook comes up and checkmates, or if the king moves to f6, white checkmates by playing queen g5. If instead, in this position, black plays f6, which is the usual way to try to escape checkmate, white could continue here by playing queen g6, creating a threat of discovered check by moving the bishop away and then checkmating with the queen. Defending against that, rook f7 protects against the checkmate, but black is losing a rook. After the same, bishop h6 check, king h8, and queen captures rook. Let's go back to the position where black captured the pawn with the knight. Here, black could have captured with the bishop or the queen as well. Capturing with the bishop is somewhat better, although not good either. After bishop takes, white would respond the same way. Bishop takes h7, king takes bishop, queen h5, king g8, bishop takes g7. Now black can capture on e3 with a check, king h1. Now black cannot capture the bishop similarly because queen g5 check followed by rook f3. After playing f6, which is a better defense, white here could not follow with the same queen g6 because black can escape by playing knight e5. And after pawn takes knight, the queen can capture the bishop, and black is in a winning position because they have an extra bishop. On the other hand, white still has a winning attack after moving the bishop away first, threatening with the same checkmate, and after knight b6, which opens up the 7th rank for the queen to protect that g7 square, then after rook f3, black is in serious trouble again. The best black could have done and should have done is to recapture with the queen in this position. Then the same combination doesn't work. Now, after bishop h7, king h7, queen h5, king g8, bishop takes g7, king g7, rook f3, black can capture the pawn on c2, and then after the rook check, return with the queen, give the queen up for a rook, and black has enough material for the queen. Black has a rook and 2 bishops. Even though white has an extra pawn also, black is not worse. Black is even a little better in this position. Instead of trying to memorize this exact position or variations connected to this sacrifice, I recommend you rather try to remember this idea of white trading on c5 and then having a double bishop sacrifice on h7 and g7 connected to a queen check on h5 and bringing the rook out on f3. Also, you need to remember black has some defensive resources. Later on this DVD, you shall see a couple of more situations when white can try to sacrifice the 2 bishops, and it does not always work. But you always need to keep it in mind, because if it works, it really works, it may lead to checkmate. If it doesn't, it may really lose. You may stay 2 bishops down. So it's an idea to always keep in mind, but always calculate. You cannot possibly remember all the different positions, and just one piece, one black or white piece, being in 1 square away from where it is right now, it can and will make the difference. So therefore, just calculate each and every time. Let's get back to the position for a moment after the black queen captured on c5. Now we understand that the double bishop sacrifice in this particular position does not work. Of course, that doesn't mean we have to give up and resign. White is still a little better in this position anyway. White should play b4, chasing the queen back. And after queen c7, bring more help. bring the rook out to f3. Now the sacrifices are threatening again, and black needs to be real careful. For example, if black plays bishop f6, which seems to be the right idea to trade off that dangerous looking dark squared white bishop, that would lose right away. White would play bishop h7, king h7, rook h3 check, king g8, and queen h5. Black's problem right now is that the bishop on f6 is in front of black's pawn on f7, and therefore that pawn cannot move ahead, opening up an escape route for the black king. And black cannot defend against the checkmate threat of queen h7 or queen h8. The only way black can delay the end is play bishop h4, when white wouldn't rush taking the bishop, which would allow f6, but would now sacrifice the second bishop. And after king takes, queen check, the checkmate follows very soon. This is one of my own games that I played back in the 1990 Olympiad against Mai. Here I decided to choose a different plan. I understand, of course, that f4 is a normal, typical move here, but I decided to bring my queen out instead in this position. Well, the ideas are similar. Bring the queen to h3 and then try to deflect the defense of the knight on f6 from the h7 square. My opponent responded with rook to c8. And here I could have, and some other people played queen h3, but I chose rook a to d1 in this position, getting ready for a possible opening of the d file after a knight trade on e5 followed by knight e4 or such. But my opponent played queen c7, getting out of the line of the rook, and now came queen h3. And black played h6, freeing up the knight, so now the black knight on f6 is no longer tied down, protecting on h7. And f4. So we're back to our regular theme, except that my queen is already on h3. Here my opponent made a mistake that cost her a pawn. She played knight e4. Here, this is one of those little typical combinations that white can win a pawn with. Knight captured d7. Here, if knight takes d2, I would capture the black rook, and after knight captures f1, knight e6, winning at least 2 pawns. Black recaptured, and bishop captures e4, pawn captures e4, and d captures c5. The whole problem now for black is that white has a discovery coming. If any of the black pieces recapture on c5, the white knight can jump to e4, for example, winning a pawn, because now the rook is also attacking the black queen. My opponent, realizing this, moved the queen out of the way of the d file. Knight c4 came, bishop captured on c5, and now the problem comes from the other side. Queen g4, threatening with checkmate. Here, if black defends against the checkmate by playing g6, even more trouble comes after queen h4. And if the queen gets to f6, that's really, really dangerous for black. My opponent rather gave up on the pawn by playing f6 and leaving the pawn on e6 for me to capture. king h8, and now my rook enters the 7th rank. That's usually very dangerous for black. In this already lost position, black made it even quicker by playing rook c6, and after queen g4, I created a checkmate threat on g7, while black's bishop on b7 is still under attack. Because of this loss of material, black resigned. The next game we shall see is played by international master Hartson versus Upton back in 1984. However, in this position, instead of rook a to d1, which I played in this position, Hartson played queen h3 right away. His opponent captured the knight with knight takes e5, and after pawn takes back, the knight, of course, has to go to e4, otherwise white would checkmate on h7. And here, rook a to d1. Now, white is threatening to capture the knight on e4, and after pawn captures knight, the discovery by bishop takes pawn, or even bishop b5, followed by queen c7 and rook d7. Black here decided to play knight g5, attacking white's queen. The answer was queen h5, king g6, and the queen simply went back to e2. Now, white is threatening to attack the knight when the knight would have only one safe square, going back to e4, resulting in the same trouble after knight takes, pawn takes, and either bishop takes pawn or bishop b5 followed by rook d7. Of course, if the bishop blocks, the bishop gets into a pin which white can use right away by playing c4. But it was black's turn here, and that's why the queen went out of the d file, so there are no more discovered attacks with the bishop. Now white is ready to play c4. Remember, I mentioned this plan earlier. Now white will be more than happy to trade these, so later this knight could get to d6. Black answered by playing f5, trying to invite white to do en passant, then black would be okay after bishop taking back. But white rather played f4, chasing the knight away. Knight came to e4. And now white is ready for a combination. Pawn takes d5, pawn takes, knight takes e4, f takes e4, and bishop takes e4. Again, it's all connected to opening this diagonal of the bishop on b2. If now black captures the bishop, the problem comes after queen c4 check. And for example, rook f7, e6, and then the problem is the rook coming into d7, or in some other variations, the queen coming and checkmating along the diagonal. In the actual game, black did not capture the bishop, but played rook f to d8, protecting the pawn on d5. But this is practically equaling to resigning. Now white is a pawn ahead and can continue the attack. f5. White doesn't even care anymore about the bishop on e4. Black capture now. King queen c4 check, king g7 and f6, bishop captures, pawn captures, king f8, rook captures rook, queen captured, and king f7. That pawn on f7 is very, very dangerous with still the queens on the board. Queen d2, attacking white's bishop, and pawn on e3. But white doesn't care. White is going for the kill. Queen e6. Now, if black would capture the bishop, white could simply check on d6, chase out the king from f8, and then promote the pawn on f8 to a new queen, and it will be checkmate on the next move. Black here took the pawn instead of the bishop with a check, and after king h1, black played queen b3, attacking white's rook and also hanging on to the d6 square. But now white has a pretty combination to end the game. Queen captures c8, bishop captures, followed by another sacrifice, bishop g7. Now, if the king captures the bishop, by promoting the pawn, we checkmate. Or also, if the king decides to go the other way, to e7, white would also promote, and the checkmate is not far away. This is our last example in the section of typical games and ideas. This game is played by former world champion Capablanca versus Bernstein. In this position, after bishop b2, black played bishop d6. And white here answered right away with knight e5. Usually, we would develop a knight to d2 or castle first, but in this game, white played knight e5. Black answered with queen c7, and now f4 is kind of forced if we want to maintain presence in the center. Black played b6, and white castled. Bishop b7, knight d2. So now, at least on white's end, we're back to normal completely. If black would castle here, we are on familiar territory. However, black did not. Black played knight e4 right away. And that is a mistake. Generally speaking, whenever you get away from the basic opening principles, such as controlling the center, developing your pieces, and castling in a timely manner, very often you get in trouble, just like in this example. The Cuban world champion here captured knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, followed up by bishop b5, pinning black's knight on d7. This practically forces black to give up his bishop for the knight on e5, and white recaptured with the f pawn. Now, white's rook is also in the game, and white can start attacking with moves like queen h5 or queen g4 in the near future. Black castled, and now this allowed white to gain advantage by capturing the knight on d7, queen captures, and now d takes c5. Now black's queen is under attack, so black is forced to capture on d1, rook back to ad1, and white is clearly better. Black just gave up on that pawn on c5 because if they would capture back on c5, white's plan would be to play bishop a3 and attack that pawn, and after the rook protected, rook d7 would win a pawn anyway. In the actual game, black played here rook f to d8 and stayed behind the pawn, but after pawn takes b6, pawn takes, and a4, white won the game in a little while. We just saw a whole bunch of typical games and ideas in this opening. Now we'll move on and learn a little bit about more exact moves and variations to know about the Colle. First, we shall look at variations when black develops the bishop to e7 and the knight to c6. Knight c6, bishop b2, bishop e7. Castle. White could also play knight bd2. There isn't much of a importance which one white plays first. Castle. And now, normally, black also castles. Black has tried some other moves also, for example, capturing on d4, when normally white recaptures with the pawn. And here, black played knight e4. I think that's a little bit premature, although playable for black. Here, I recommend to play c4 right away, because the black pawn cannot capture the pawn on c4, needing to protect the knight on e4. Here, after f5, white would play knight c3, castle, and then capture on b5. Knight takes c3, bishop takes c3, and now white has a better position either after pawn takes, when black has a hole on the e5 square, or after queen d5, white would quickly play bishop c4, followed by d5, getting rid of the isolated pawn and opening up the diagonal of both bishops, with a clearly better position for white. Going back to move 7, when we were discussing pawn takes on d4 followed by an early knight e4, black normally plays castling. And now knight b to d2 is the standard move. Here, the most recommended move for black is to play b6 to develop the bishop to b7. Whenever black early captures on d4, I'm happy, because it's better for black to maintain that tension in the center, at times to be able to play c4 and not to commit to the trade after this, because white's rook often is able to come out this way. So black plays b6, and white, of course, jumps in with the knight to e5. As we saw earlier in the game Summerscale Gimenez, white got a nice position when black in this position captured the knight on e5. We also saw what happens if in this position black plays knight to b4 in the game Yusupov-Spiridonov. Now let's see the main move, bishop to b7. Here white can choose to play a3 or to play f4 right away. I personally don't think there is an urgency to play a3 in this position, and white can play f4 right away. Let's see though some possibilities after a3. Here black's best move is to capture on e5, and after d takes e5, jump in to e4. This is a very interesting and complex position. White has many choices. In some games, white tried f4. In other, queen e2. White even tried an interesting move, knight b1. It looks silly, but actually it is a tricky move. White is threatening to trap black's knight now by playing f3, knight g5, followed by h4. Of course, that is only a trap, but nevertheless, it's not such a bad move, as silly it looks. I think this position, objectively, is close to equal, but it requires further testing. Going back to this position, as I said, white can choose to play a3, but I think I prefer f4 in this position. Here, if black captures knight takes knight on e5, we saw the game Smyslov versus Mariotti earlier, where white had a pleasant advantage and won a nice game. Instead, black could try, for example, rook c8 in this position. The game could develop the following way. a3. Now it's already needed, because if white does not play a3, black could capture, and after pawn captures back, knight b4, and now after bishop e2, the knight could capture on c2 because the rook also attacks the c2 square. After a3 in this position, black played rook c7, queen e2, g6. And now white, of course, is not forced to, but played g4 in this position, which is one of the typical plans we saw in some of the very early games on this DVD. Black took on e5, the d-pawn captured back, knight e4, knight takes e4, pawn took back, and bishop c4. Now white's plan is to play f5, and then later to be able to push the e-pawn to e6, opening up the dark squares for the bishop on b2. Rook d7, black is trying to control the d-file, but white also has a rook to put there. Rook captured d1, rook captures d1, queen c8, and white is going back to the f-file to support the f4, f5 push. Rook d8 and f5. White again has a very strong attack. White is better in this position. It's a game between Ramon and Korneyev. White eventually lost the game, but for now they have a good position. They only lost because of later mistakes. Let's look at the setup now, when black puts the knight on c6 and the bishop on d6. Black plays here 5 knight to c6. Here white has two choices. Usually white plays bishop b2, but castling is also possible. Some people like to avoid bishop b2, pawn takes, and now bishop b4 check. Now black's idea is, after knight bd2, to play knight e4. Or, if white plays c3, blocking the check, and now after bishop e7, white's bishop on b2 is even less likely to come to life without playing c4, which is of course not bad, but it's a different concept than what white was looking for, playing the Zukertort variation of the Colle. For now, let's stay with the move order of castling first. Here we saw two of the games early on, the very first two games, the one by Maróczy and the other one by Alekhine, after black trading on d4. As I said earlier, I think that's not a good idea to do so early for black. So let's look at bishop to d6. Now black is planning to play e6 to e5. That's why, of course, we're playing bishop to b2. In this position, black can try to play queen c7 with the idea of playing e5 and also trying to take, and play knight b4 by putting pressure on the c2 pawn also with the queen. But according to my personal analysis, I like white's position after knight a3 with the idea of knight b5, and after a6 white could play pawn takes, bishop takes, and c4, which of course leads to a totally different type of position than what we saw so far, but nevertheless I do like white's position because black played kind of not so coordinated by the queen being on c7 so early, not castling a6. In the meantime, white is fully developed ready to occupy the open files, and I prefer white in this position. Usually, however, black simply castles in this position, following the basic opening principles. Here, a lot of players play a3, preventing the knight b4 plan. The other move is knight b to d2. Let's first discuss quickly about a3. I personally don't like it so much because black can play queen to c7 in this position, no longer allowing the white knight to jump in to e5 because black has 3 pieces controlling that square. And white cannot stop black from playing e5. I had a game against Grandmaster Udasin back in 1991 where I played in this position c4, switching to a different type of position, and he played c takes d4, e takes d4, and then e5, with reaching an approximately equal position, even though I won later the game with a nice combination that's only thanks to his later errors. White has a possibility after queen c7 to take on c5, and when the bishop takes back, take bishop takes f6, ruining black's pawn structure in front of the king. But in this very case, that does not give any advantage to white, because now black will have a pair of bishops, and black can quickly actually create counterattack along that g file, and also the bishop can come back to d6, and also black can play f5, stopping any further opening of the position with e4, and later the bishop can get to this diagonal, giving black a very reasonable game. That's why this is not something for white to go for. According to today's standing of the theory, I consider knight b to d2 the better move than a3. For a long time in this position, they considered for black the best move queen e7, with the idea to prepare e5, and if white plays knight e5, stopping black's pawn advance, then to trade pawns, and then play bishop to a3. Let's talk a little bit about this position. Here white has two choices, either to capture the bishop on a3 right away, or to play queen c1. Both are quite playable. After queen c1, black would trade, and the queen would capture back. White would have quite similar plans by playing f4 and trying to bring the rook out here to attack. However, it's a lot more popular to capture on a3, and after queen a3 to protect the pawn by playing c3 in this position. Before we look further the position with c3, let me show you a very famous game that black won. White played knight d to f3, and this is a game between Bogolyubov and the Cuban world champion Capablanca. Bishop d7, knight captures c6, bishop captures, queen d2, rook a to c8, and c3. In this game, black successfully managed to create an attack on the c file against the pawn on c3. Black played a6, knight e5, bishop b5. Black doesn't even mind trading the bishops by creating double pawns on the b file. In this position, white should have played c4. They made a mistake and played f3, trying to prevent the black knight from coming to e4. Black captured on d3, knight captured back, and black started doubling the rooks by playing rook c7. Rook ac1 came to protect the pawn, and black doubled up the rooks with rook f to c8. After rook c2, black brought the knight via e8 to d6, threatening to go to b5, and later black won that pawn on c3. That's weak. This is certainly not an example to follow as white. However, this is a very famous game, and based on this game for a long time, this variation used to be considered the best for black, at least equalizing the game. However, recent theories changed, and white is considered slightly better in the position after queen takes a3. We are back at the position after queen takes a3, when white's best move is to protect the pawn with the pawn instead, with c3. We have seen so far one game in this position where black played bishop to d7. That was the game between Evans and Gomez. In some games, black has tried trading knights right away. When white would recapture, attacking the knight would have to go back to d7, and here white's best move would be to play rook e1. I think white is also a little bit better in this position. Black's bishop on c8 is always a problem because it's buried behind a wall of pawns on the same color squares, and it's hard to activate it. They played knight c5, attacking the bishop. The white bishop returned to c2, of course staying on that diagonal. Bishop d7, and white played rook e3. Nothing changed, the same plan. We want to get the rook out there and checkmate the king. Real simple. Attacking players, I hope you like this. And here, black played bishop to c6, which loses a piece right away. Now, white can play b4, and as it turns out, black's pieces are standing really unfortunate. If the knight moves to d7, white can play b5, trapping the bishop, as after bishop takes pawn, c4 discovery wins the bishop. After knight a6, the problem is that white, with the same b5 move, forks black's bishop and knight, and after bishop takes pawn, again c4 wins black's bishop. Black played knight e4, and now white captured on e4, pawn captured back, and b5 again, and white is winning the pawn on e4. In the position after white plays c3 on move 12, black could try to play queen b2. When besides trying to protect the pawn, white could try to sacrifice it as well. Rook c1 and giving up on the pawn on a2, and simply play f4 and try to attack. Besides, in several games where white was successful doing that, surprisingly, even the computer programs like this for white. Usually, computer programs do not like to give up easily pawns or material, but in this case, even they consider white has sufficient compensation. And last but not least, black can try to play a5 in this position, which leads to an interesting game. White would continue as usual with f4, and black is trying to get counterplay by playing a4. Here in a game between Abergel and Lutz back in 2004, white played rook c1, and white got a decent game. White could also try other moves, such as queen to f3 or queen b1. Although I did like what happened in the game. Rook c1, in the above mentioned game, black traded the pawns, did not capture it, and after pawn take back, the queen retreated. Black was afraid to keep the queen so far away from the defense of the king. Rook f3 came, bishop d7, and rook to h3. The usual threat, I bet you know by now, bishop takes pawn on h7, followed by queen h5. Black played g6, and came queen e1, getting the queen to the action. knight h5, attacking the pawn on f4, and white simply protected it by playing queen e3. I personally like white's position here. Going back to the 10th move, right after black traded the pawns on d4 and played bishop a3 in this position, there is another move that's interesting to try, and that is to move the queen another time. Move it to c7 and attack the knight another time. Now, white needs to do something about it. Either protect the knight or move it. Both are possible. White could trade knight on c6, allowing bishop takes h2, and then king h1, pawn takes knight, and play g3, trapping black's bishop. Here, black must capture on g3 to get 3 pawns for the bishop. But because black has only the queen attacking the white king, white of course is completely safe in a position like this. White would be a little bit better because the black pawns are not advanced at all. In such a situation, the bishop is slightly more valuable than 3 pawns because there are still so many pieces on the board. Therefore, after knight takes knight on c6, I'd recommend for black rather simply recapture on c6, when white should protect the pawn on h2, either by moving up to h3 or protecting it with the knight, followed up by playing c4 soon, which is a somewhat different type of position than what we are used to, but it's close to equal and playable for both sides. The whole idea of black playing queen c7 in this position, moving the queen a second time, is that if white protects the knight, for example, by playing f4, black would play knight b4. And if the bishop moves, the pawn on c2 is hanging. And of course, if we do not move the bishop and the knight captures our bishop, that's a very painful thought, because that bishop is very important for our attack on the king side. That's why, probably in this position, white has no choice but capturing on c6 and play a different type of middle game, but it's still an interesting game with full of possibilities. And finally, a few words about the knight bd7 variation. We have seen quite a few games in the introduction on this subject. After bishop b2, again, black has two choices: develop the bishop to d6 or to e7. As we have seen, white's plan is exactly the same as if the knight would develop to c6. For example, after bishop d6, white would play castle, although we saw also the immediate knight e5 as Capablanca played against Bernstein. Black castle, knight bd2, b6, knight e5, bishop b7, and f4. Let's see what happens if black plays now knight e4. White can try to trade the bishop for the knight, pawn takes, and play knight c4, attacking the bishop. Here black can go two different ways. Either trade on e5 or retreat the bishop on e7. There was an interesting game after bishop e7. White traded on d7, queen traded, pawn took on c5, black had to trade queens, rook captures back, and the bishop took on c5. And here white traded the bishops also. And in this endgame, interestingly enough, the black bishop on b7 doesn't have much future. And white won the game nicely because of the typical case of a good knight versus a bad bishop that has no target. Just a few more moves of what happened. Rook d8, king f1, king f8, king e1, king e7, and white traded all the rooks as well. Of course, this is not a won position for white, but it's a very pleasant endgame where only white can win. And in the actual game, white did. It's a game between Fuentes and Arencibia in 1991. Going back to move 12, where black in the game played bishop to e7, if instead black plays knight takes e5, white would take back with the f-pawn, and after bishop e7, white would play queen g4. After b5, white would play knight d6, and after bishop d6, pawn takes d6. And now, again, the bishop will get revived. For example, queen cannot take the pawn because pawn takes c5, threatening not only the queen, but checkmate with queen g7 as well. Not being able to capture the pawn on d6 gives white an advantage. Well, we came to the end of this DVD. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, looking over these games and gaining ideas of how to develop an attack in the Colle Zukertort variation. Well, if you like it, do more research